Well, good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all here on this glorious day. Not many faces I know sitting in the audience here, which is great. So I hope seeing Pewter has held at its best and had a chance to look around. It's worth a good looking around. We've got some lovely stuff here. This is In Conversation, and our theme basically will be about design. Our guests here are all into design, and it's a huge subject in any case, so you can probably go anywhere with it. They're all very specialised in their work, and rather than me tell you who they are, they can introduce themselves. So we have Rebecca here, and Rebecca, perhaps you could tell us what you're about.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a watchmaker and historian. I've actually been in the trade for 20 years this year, so big year for me. I started out training as a jeweler and silversmith before discovering watchmaking. I started my own company when I was 25 with my husband, who's also a watchmaker, so we're our own brand now. Started off doing restoration work, and now we also make pieces from scratch. And I write about the history of time too. So yeah, just published a book, which you said I get one mention on the book. It's Hands of Time, it's out now. Thank you.
Varuna.
Hi. Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me here. Yeah. This is such a nice audience. It's so, we were just talking earlier, it's such an interesting little space where you've been involved for years. So thank you for having me here.
No, pleasure.
I am the founder and curator of Ruup and Form. It's a gallery that's focused on material-led artists. So we do showcase a lot of artists working with different kinds of materials. Sustainability is one of the ethos of Ruup and Form. And I know Paul asked me to say this. I'm going to say what Ruup and Form is all about, what it means. So the word Ruup comes from the word, it's a Sanskrit word, which means form, really. So it's the how you feel, the version of, you would use it in when you say beautiful, or you would use it to say somebody is not beautiful. So it's really a feeling more than a word. And then there's form, which is a very masculine version of form. So that's Ruup and Form for you. We have been running this for 4 years, and I've worked in museum before and have had a life in advertising. So long story short, here we are with Ruup and Form.
So how do you know if they love it or hate it, if the word is the same for both?
That's it. I think that's the thing with objects, isn't it?
Right.
You either just fall in love with it and you feel really attracted to it, and the kind of energy you put to a teacup sometimes.
Sure. Right. Angus.
Well, hello everybody. There are some familiar faces from last year, so it's good to see you all again. I'm Angus Patterson. I'm the Senior Curator of Metalwork at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I have specific responsibility for a whole range of metalwork from 1450 to 1900, so actually not contemporary, but the V&A was set up to inspire contemporary design, so the point is to use the historic collections in order to do that. So I've been at the museum now, I slightly wince when I say this, but 26 years. I thought I'd get 2 years on the CV and move on, but it's been very, very interesting. And I've been very lucky that my career there has coincided with the museum refurbishing all of its public spaces. I've had the chance to work on lots of different gallery projects and sort of broaden my knowledge of metalwork, but into a wider context of material culture. So I'm here to bang the drum for historic metalwork and how good it is as inspiration for contemporary design.
Yes, but you did very kindly allow us to come to the V&A last year. An amazing, what you call a tank.
The tank case.
The tank, which is a glass case, about the length of this. And we had our prize winners there, so that was fabulous. So for a student to have their piece at the V&A, pretty good. So we thank you for that.
Hopefully again one day soon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, if I can sort of kick off with something and then we can move on from there. What's really interesting me these days, I see it more and more, not being a designer, not really understanding, is 3D printing. And the more people I talk to say, oh yeah, I use that, I do that. Well, really? So I'd be interested to hear your views on where we are now with it, how useful it'll be in the future. You know, will it change design? So perhaps, Rebecca, you could give us an idea.
Sure. So 3D printing has been around in the jewellery industry for a while now. And with watchmaking, you kind of have two elements of it. You have case making and you have the making of the internal mechanism, which are two kind of separate disciplines, generally speaking. And we did actually experiment with a bit of 3D laser sintering for the production of cases, but we were finding that the technology isn't good enough yet for watchmaking standards. So we've got tiny engineering tolerances we work to.
Yeah.
But it is improving rapidly. Right. So it's now used for cases, not for components yet for the actual mechanics, but that it's only going to be a matter of time.
Is it the tolerances that they can't get?
Yeah, and porosity is another problem. So you get air bubbles in it, so you get inconsistency in the quality of the metal, which can lead to mechanical failure for parts. But yeah, I mean, you can see it changing rapidly. I think it's one of those technologies that it has its place. Sometimes we use it for forming ideas. So if you've got a concept for a case, obviously it's going to be very ergonomic, as any wearable has to be ergonomic. So it's quite an effective way to produce something quickly. You can 3D print it in resin, wear it, try it, see how it feels before you actually invest then in making it in practice. So it's very useful for that.
So what metals can you use to do it, to get your cast or whatever you want to produce?
Casting. I feel guilty saying this knowing where I am, but precious metals. Yeah, we've not worked in pewter for cases. I think it's a wear issue. But just looking at that beautiful pewter inlaid clock upstairs has given me some box inspiration now. So.
Okay. Varuna, where do you fit into this 3D?
I have mixed feelings about it. Like Rebecca said, it's been around for a long time, and it has its positives where it can be used to for circular design. It's very sustainable. Where you before you get to the final, you can mold. There's versions of it, and then there is the 3D design that is out there right now, where people are creating, let's say, for ceramics. They're creating entire sculptures of it, and then the question of uniqueness comes in. So I think it's a complicated question, and I think, like everything else, it'll have its place, and it's a technique, like any other technique, that is required, but also I don't think it's an all-encompassing and final. It needs to come with many other versions and different masteries into it, then the excellence of 3D can come through. But definitely, it's making its mark right now in a lot of.
Would if you were choosing something to come into your, what do you call it?
To represent, to showcase.
Represent, that'd be the word. I mean, would you look upon something that had been made with 3D printing, would you say, well, no, that's not so skillful as somebody who's done something by hand? So
I think that's where the technique comes in, is what all are they applying to their work. Whenever we show anything, it's always blurring the lines between art, design, and craft. So if it's simple, decorative, then maybe I will not be as excited about it. It has to give me. It has to give you a feeling. Yes, sure. So, and like I said, there are all kinds of collectors. There are all kinds of buyers. So that you have to be able to showcase it as well. Yeah. But for me, I think it has to. There has to be more going on.
Hasn't got you excited yet.
Exactly. I mean, there are some artists who have. I must be honest.
Yeah, sure. Angus.
At the V&A, we haven't latched on to 3D printing as quickly. It's not business as usual for us in the way in the 19th century electrotyping and photography, these other two great new scientific new imaging technologies were developed, and the museum latched onto those straight away because we were creating reproductions of objects as works of art, as exemplars for artists to learn to draw and to copy from. And 3D printing in the museum context hasn't had that traction yet. I can see that it has uses. A lot of little innovations like this don't tend to replace previous things. They tend to become a new component in something that still has a lot of the traditional components. So I can see that there are obviously equivalents with historic pewter, which was mostly cast, so designed to be reproduced in molds constantly. So the whole idea of reproduction, I can see where 3D printing is incredibly useful for that, particularly for creating models from which you might make molds to cast. But yeah, certainly in the museum context, we are acquiring some born digital works, which sometimes are effectively 3D models on screen that don't ever have a material output, and then it just seems to me it's adding another layer into what are a whole variety of means of production. It doesn't necessarily replace things.
That's interesting. Right, well, we'll keep with you a minute then, Angus, because you've given me some nice little questions here to ask. You say how best to use designs from the past to inspire the present, which is quite an interesting subject. How do you?
Well, events like this. Can I have the clicker? Is it okay? I was going to show you actually. Let me just whiz back. Here we go. There's some old pieces from the V&A. Last year, when we were able to host an exhibition of Pewter live at the museum, we had the chance to have a couple of makers' days. In fact, we have one tomorrow, and there are a few more places available if anybody would like to join us. But the idea is for you all as contemporary designers to know that these historic pieces are here to inspire modern design. That's what they were collected for. What I often find interesting is when the same idea may happen 200 or 300 years apart, to see how it's expressed. Oh, I'll just go back to that one. I was talking about electrotypes a minute ago. This was, using electricity to deposit metal into molds taken of original works. And the women's singles trophy at Wimbledon, without doubt the most beautiful trophy in all of sport. I refuse to discuss it. Is an electrotype copy of one of the most celebrated pewter objects, decorative arts objects that has ever been produced, the temperanture basin that was made by, or cast in a mould, engraved by a medalist called Francois Briot from Montbéliard in France. And this gets multiplied repeatedly, so you see lots of these in different collections. Bernard Palissy produces them in earthenware, and then in the 19th century this becomes a model for art history teaching. It becomes almost an archetype, and I calculated that by 1875 we had 15 versions of this dish in different materials and finishes, and the Wimbledon singles trophy was one of those. So, but I wanted to show you, I've just acquired often the pewter collectors can be quite sniffy about Britannia metal because it's more of an industrial metal. Britannia metal now is an alloy, is very similar to modern pewter. And it doesn't necessarily grow out of historic pewter smithing. It grows out of the Sheffield plate trade, where they're developing steel rollers, steam-powered steel rollers in the 18th century, and rolling pewter or rolling the Britannia metal into sheet form and then working it up from sheet form. And I thought I'd show you this because I've recently acquired 24 pieces of Britannia metal from a private collection in Edinburgh. This one I just acquired on a hunch because I thought it looked interesting, and underneath it says R.F. Sturgis patent. I looked that up and it's 1852, so obviously for the V&A growing out of the Great Exhibition, it looked like there was going to be some relevance there, and it turned out to be a really fascinating object. One of the reasons I acquired it was because it reminded me of Ella McIntosh's work, and I bought 2 of Ella's bud vases last year where she's rolling sheet pewter, scrunching up cardboard either side and running it through rollers, and it leaves these beautiful impressions, completely unique impressions onto the bud vases. And this was a chap called R.F. Sturgis. He was a Quaker metalworker in Birmingham who was working in Britannia metal, and he used lace, damask lace, and he produced adverts from 1849 advertising damask Britannia metal. And he's basically rolling sheet metal through steel rollers sandwiched with lace between that creates these beautiful patterns on the outside of the object. They go dark with age, like a lot of old pewter does, depending on the conditions they're kept in, but you still get these lovely patterns. So it's really the same idea 150 years, 180 years ago that Ella is working with now. Gerald Benny was doing similar things in the 60s as well. So that's sort of, for me, that's where you get the same idea expressed.
I know I should know this, but can you explain the difference between Britannia metal and pewter? Is it the amount of tin or the?
No, I don't think anyone can explain it. And there are lots of debates around it. So it grows. It's not so much a material. It's it grows out of a development in techniques. So it develops in Sheffield that has no great pewter history. But they have Sheffield plating developing, and Sheffield plating is thin layer of silver fused to copper, rolled into sheet form and worked up, but it's still quite a wealthy market that's buying it.
Yeah.
What producing this in Britannia Metal does, so some historic pewter will have a little bit of lead, not to make it cheap or anything like that, but just to assist the casting in the mould.
Yeah.
This has no lead in it at all, and it's primarily 97% tin, a little bit of antimony, a little bit of copper, around 95, 97. It's just high tin content, and similar to modern pewter. So it's more almost like a branding name, giving a new title to a new industrial way of producing from something that was
You wouldn't be
going
able to
out.
look at something and say that's Britannia Metal.
You would by the way it's made. So it's much more likely to be made through stamping, spinning, or rolling, whereas historic pewter, the majority of time is cast. So.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we could have the women's Wimbledon champion. Perhaps we could have it made in pewter. Perhaps we could get somebody to do that.
Well, they get a copy. The winners get a copy each year, and they used to get one that was half size until Roger Federer complained, and then they now get one that's 2/3 the size. But they look like they've been copied from about 50 yards away. They're not accurate copies, and that's where 3D printing could come in. You can scan the original and do it. So.
Well, maybe that'll be the brief for next year then.
Yeah.
Lovely. Varuna, tell us a bit about you and what you do and what you aspire to put in your collection.
Well, let me run you through some of the artists that we show who work with metal, and I think that'll be. I hope I can work this. Oh, okay. So if any of you visited, this is us at Collect at Somerset House just earlier this year. And to the bottom left, you can see Fleur's work, which is made out of pewter. This is what she did. And she runs a series called Homewards. And she was right here. Maybe we can all go and say hi. I'm sure a lot of you know her already. She's very interested in the animal world and how nature plays back into her work, and her inspiration is looking at something really small and giving it size and creating the story around it.
Yes.
With this piece, it's which was I think her walk in Peru, where she saw the red ants taking food back into their just disappearing into a little space, and she created this. And it was an interesting way to show it because we got it in a place where the ants almost disappear, and you had this lovely enamel work that she's done on the leaves, which you can see closer up here. So very interesting piece where it's just taken something on an everyday life, and it's created an artwork around it, and it's so giving as a piece because it's not just talking about the world around us that we almost choose to ignore. I think she has a piece here that she's also from the same series, which is on frog spawns. So again, it's almost taking a moment in time and giving it that much intelligence and thought and just bringing it up. What I find interesting about her work, especially with the pewter that she does, the lighting it's placed in will almost change the way you're viewing that work. So depending on the sunlight, or if there is a light coming in from your lamp, it's almost alive as a piece because it's reflecting because of the shapes and the curves to it. We showed one of her pieces earlier at the Decorative Art Fair last year, and by evening they had this lovely pink light that would shine onto this gorgeous piece, and it would just change the way you're viewing. And I think that's the joy of pewter, that it does that. It gives you this mirror effect suddenly, and it can be silver, but it can also give you this glazed mirror effect. So owning a piece like that, you're getting many versions of it as you go through the day. And I think that's the joy with her. She works a lot with, before I get to, but I'm sure Fleur will, you will have to go and check her. She's at the hall right now. She's showcasing at the hall. So she works with concrete, and she She likes to discover different techniques. And I think that's the joy of working with an artist like that, who's not just found the love for pewter after having done her masters in metalwork and silverwork. There she is. But it's also just spreading that passion for pewter and finding different ways of making it exciting, whether it's including wood or cork or concrete to it. It's that development that makes her work really exciting. Here we have Claire Mallet, who is a metalworker and silversmith. Loves to work with Britannia metal as well, but this is with aluminium and tar. And she also works a lot with silver. We commission a lot with her, with for other people, with collectors to do silver. But these were these 3 little pieces that were on the palm of your hand. And she's always excited about nature and landscape. And she works out of Hereford with looking into the woods. So it's that dialogue that you're almost seeing through. It's, again, the same reflection of taking a moment, using metal, which we would say quote unquote unprecious metal, aluminium, and creating something that delicate. She's added silver to it. She's beaten it and treated it like silver. So almost like Fleur, almost taking away that feeling of what is precious and what is not precious. Using metal in this, giving every metal the equal space. So in her case with aluminium, in this one, though, we do show her other works. This is her work with silver and a piece of rock that she picked. So these pieces there was a series that we did, it's called Place and Time, where she picked up a rock from all her walks and then created a piece around it. And this is called the Kyle of Tongue. And then we have Eva, and I wanted to put her work because we were talking about 3D printing. Her process starts from that. It starts from creating molds, but then she takes aluminium and creates these brushes. And this series is a talk on motherhood. So a nice complex piece that you can actually wear, but it's all made in aluminium, but also relating to our everyday life and motherhood. So, and we have Jessica Jew, we show, who does work with silver. Purely silver, very traditional silver, fluid forms, mixing different techniques. I think what's interesting about all these artists is that they've taken metal, and even though they're rooted in tradition, by adding different techniques and techniques from different parts of the world, they're creating something very different. They are getting inspired not just by the traditional, but also getting inspired by the contemporary. And you're creating works that could fit in a lot of genres. So
I see the natural world is a great pull for you.
Yeah, I think when you have sustainability as your ethos as a company, I think that naturally becomes, and I think we attract the same kind of collectors and makers who are constantly viewing and the world in a way that they want to make it better.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That piece of Fleur's with the ants, I can tell you, it's a leaf eating.
Yes.
Leaf cutting.
Leaf cutting out.
And the leaf it takes back to its nest. They don't eat it. They pile it up as a sort of compost heap, which then gives them something to eat.
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting idea.
That's, I think, the interesting bit, when we have people visiting it and seeing, and they have so many things. Is it coming out? Is it going in? What are they doing this for? So it's the dialogue that it just starts right there. Is so interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I bought 4 of the ants for my four grandchildren, who are only about this height, but got their name on the bottom.
Wonderful.
So present them and they'll wonder what the hell it is. But
maybe it's time for another commission. What should we make him?
There we are. Oh, that's very interesting. Right, Rebecca, come on, off you go.
Thank you. Well, as practitioners, we're really traditional in what we do. I think a lot of that stems from coming at it from a restoration background. And I mean, for us, that's been a fantastic way into designing and making new things, because we look back to look forwards, because in our minds, the most beautiful objects out there have already been made. Like, literally, they're already out there. And talking about museums and galleries are such an incredible resource. I spent a lot of time researching at the British Museum. And yeah, it's just, they're such incredible places to go and visit as a maker. And most of them, if you book in with curators, you can get behind the scenes and get closer with the objects, even maybe handle some of them. I don't know actually sure. But yeah, they're a fantastic and underused resource. I think quite often you can find so much inspiration. And seeing how things have been made for the past few hundred years, you can see which designs work, which don't, which wear well, which are the most practical, and you can start incorporating that in your work in the future. So yeah, we're really, really big on the look back to look forwards. And even our production techniques, I'm sure a lot of the metal workers here are familiar with fly presses. Not really used in watchmaking much anymore. They were a big part of it during the Industrial Revolution, but a lot of what our industry has suffered with is CNC, so we don't do much 3D printing, but computer numeric control and computer-aided design have replaced a lot of skills in the watch industry. So that's why we've faced a lot of skills loss. But again, training as a jeweler and a silversmith first and moving across, it's been a really natural way to work. Similar using like boxwood turning methods for forming and shaping things, which I know you use it in spinning. We do a lot of spinning, which is using pewter as well. And it's all part of this kind of building your materials knowledge, which again, restoration and looking at what has already been made can really help with that. But I think for any craftsperson, building a really good bank of materials knowledge of how the working properties of different materials, how you can use them together, how you can push your boundaries with them, not just in terms of the thing that you're making, but the tools that you're making to make the thing you're making. So why, for example, using wood to turn a piece of metal is better than using a piece of metal to turn a piece of metal, because it's softer and less likely to damage it. And it takes time and pushing your boundaries, but it's a really, for us, it's been a really beneficial way to work, and we can really push what we do now because of building up this huge kind of knowledge behind us. And there's two of us, which helps, so double trouble. And these are, yeah, so on the left there you've got an example of an 18th century chased Ruup watch case. These were made in Britannia silver, Britannia metal as well. So yeah, these vary, but this was typically made through stamping and then chasing and engraving, but something you could easily achieve a design like that in pewter. And the two pictures next to it are one of our watches. So this is one that we've made completely from scratch in-house. And yeah, really mixed media, as you can see. So it's a combination of gold, German silver, steel, bronze, brass, sorry. Yeah, diamonds, rubies, bit of everything. The dial's enamelled, which isn't something we do. We do our own case making, but we don't do skills like enamelling. We're not our own engravers. So we work as part of creative communities, and collaborative exercise is a really important part of what we do as well. So we work kind of, it's just the two of us making the watches and the cases, but for the course of a project, our team might expand out to 10, 15 different craftspeople who will all input their various skills that they've spent their lives dedicating to doing this. So they're going to be a better engraver than I could ever be. So yeah, we have this little creative team for the course of a few years. This watch took 6 years to make. That will then go back to the two of us at the end of the project. But yeah, again, collaboration as a creative person is just such an exciting thing. She gets so many more ideas seeing how other people are working and having that network, which I will say for students here is really hard to maintain after you graduate. So it's good to be part of organisations like this who can bring people together so you can share ideas.
Interesting. So do you work on, people commission you to make pieces? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, everything is to commission. So we don't carry any stock. We have a build slot waiting list, so you reserve your slot.
You take their credit card before you start. Keep it
take a reservation fee. Yeah.
I mean, they're lovely pieces. And, so how many would you make a year then, or one?
We're going to be making one of those a year from here on in. So now we've got the research and development down, we can make kind of one every 12 to 18 months. And then we'll make 2 or 3 other watches where we use heritage recommissioned calibers and rebuild them and make cases for them. And yeah, that's 2 or 3 of those a year. So maybe 3 watches, 4 watches.
You must be a very patient person.
You kind of have to be in all these crafts, don't you? It's it takes time to make things.
You can hear my wife in my head. Wouldn't be any good for you then.
Yeah.
But actually, if anybody's got any questions as we go along, just pop your hand up and we'll do it.
just ask.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah.
I did have a question. It goes back to 3D printing, if I may.
Yes, of course.
If the design is made by one person, the finished article running through the printer is made by the other, that's the artistic honour of being the creator.
Who's going to answer that?
Where the concept comes from. It would end up being a collaboration if it's a shared, but in general I think it's where the concept and the first sketches come from. And then you find the right collaborators who are not trying to put their name into your creation. You have that in glass. A lot of glass artists use other glass artists to create their work as they get older. But the trademark will lie with them. It would be theirs. So it's really where the concept comes from.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other versions?
I was going to ask. Is it all right if I ask? Rebecca? If you're making just a few watches a year, and when you're working in a craft that is so much based on precision, what can you do? What creativity can you add to each one? Are you trying to make each one different, or are you trying to make each one identical?
Different, very different. So machines make things that are identical. Humans make things with their own variation. So if you're going to take a craft approach, there's no point trying to do something a machine would do, because a machine can do that. So that's kind of what you're bringing to the table, and why someone might be willing to spend more on something you've made is because there will be imperfections and variations in each one that makes something that... one of the things I really love about watches is, although time is something that, it's a celestial force, we have no control over the passing of time. And yet watches are these objects that we have created as humans to measure it. So it's kind of a scientific device, but it's a scientific device crafted by human hands, and it has that level of variation that only things humans can make. It's something that unique that we bring to the table. And yeah, I love that level of interpretation, and I really like the restrictions of having to make something very functional, but also having the areas I know I can play within that, and that's kind of your creative license. Yeah.
Very good. Questions? No? Fine. Let me think of something else to talk to you about. You gave me something here, Angus, and I'm just going to, which I found was quite interesting. Oh yes, to what extent do the material properties of pewter inhibit innovation? You said.
Question.
Yeah. That's a question I'm asking you. Yes.
It is my question effectively, and it's because I'm not a maker.
No.
I just talk about objects and I write about objects, but I'm hopeless at making. And so, one of the things I find really interesting, and I've already chatted with a couple of people this morning about that, but the things I always love to see in Pewter Live are those things that are produced that could not be produced in any other material than pewter. They wouldn't look as good. It's not just using pewter because it's cheaper than silver or cheaper than another metal. It's things that are produced best in pewter. And it's one of the things I like about Fleur's designs as well, that all her cast candlesticks that are very flowing. I just don't think that would look as good in another metal. And there are a couple of necklaces upstairs, Jill Clement and Madalena Serena. I think both of their necklaces, you just can't imagine those in other materials. And so that for me is a sort of a question to makers, really, is that pewter, it seems an incredibly liberating metal in many ways because you can work it cold. I love the idea that Judith Godden has described herself as a hobby pewterer when she's incredibly successful and works away in her shed. But to be able to just work cold at home and produce these beautiful objects all the time, it seems pewter is incredibly liberating. So for me, I wonder why, given that is the limitation the market for pewter? Or is it something that's inherent in the properties of pewter that might lean somebody to go towards other materials when pewter offers you so much flexibility?
I'm with you. I don't think so. The question is for us because we can only talk about the work. It's the makers who really know the answer to. But I find that really interesting to find objects that work only in pewter. That would be an exciting project to fall through. But I think when it comes to the limitations of pewter, it's the makers who can answer that better than, unfortunately. That's
It does have its limitations. That is the problem, really.
Maybe Rebecca's already talked about the wear.
Yeah.
You don't use
Softness. Yeah.
Exactly. Did you say you make cases in pewter, or you don't?
We haven't,
You don't.
no.
You probably could, though. You know,
Technically, you could do, yeah, but then you get into the problem of I could also make it with the same level of work in gold and charge a lot.
well, that's the
So that's,
conversation.
I mean, that's a different.
That's where pewter lies, I thought.
Yeah, but that also creates an interesting challenge because maybe then it's about finding your audience, and educating your audience is a really important part of being a maker in whatever your discipline is, because if they don't get it, they're not going to spend money on it, they need to get it. So what's your USP? What is it you're bringing to the table that is like objects that can only be made in this material is a perfect example of that.
Well, that's what Pewter Live's always been about, is to introduce people to metalwork. And pewter is such a lovely metal to start with, you know, because its melting point is so low. But to get them to stay with it, we've only got Fleur. No, we have a few pewter designers and makers. How we hold on to them, I don't know really. Everybody's got to make a living, so they move on to gold and silver. But there we go.
Question.
Yeah. Yes, Isabel.
Well, I'm not a maker, but having watched and talked to the pewters for some time, I think, picking up your point about watch cases, it's about durability as well. So, I have bought in the past some piece of jewellery, not from our pewters here, but, it's beautiful, soft, it's lovely to feel, it does all these beautiful things. But the problem is, it can break or it can bend and things. So it's about how durable something can be if you're wearing or you're using it.
Yes.
But it's wonderful for things like doorknobs because you feel a doorknob, and actually a doorknob is it's probably going to be okay. But there would be other items that wouldn't work because they wouldn't be strong enough to stand certain activity.
We did actually, because we had an architectural group at one stage. We did do doorknobs, but then we were told the melting point is so low, the fire department weren't too keen on them, so we had to drop that. But they weren't beautiful to make, but not for actual doorknobs. Cupboard knobs and things like that, of course. But
I was going to say,
chunky.
I've just had
Ed
Glover made me a load of hand
nice.
stick handles
Yeah.
for kitchen units.
No, fine.
Nice.
Well, I mean, in the hall out there, you'll see the candelabras are pewter, and they're beautiful. I mean, it's just ideal for
Ideal,
that.
absolutely.
It's just finding the application, isn't it? Really. So, Varuna, what else do you? What do you seeking generally to follow?
I think events like these are a huge education for me as well. So when we are always looking, I'm always looking to work with artists who are doing exciting new work, still based in tradition, I think. But events like these are such a great platform for not just makers, but for collectors and for researchers, educators. It's really important. So I'm really looking forward to going and spending my afternoon looking at all the works here and finding some exciting.
Do you go to colleges then? And
We do. That's one of my favorite things to do, I would say, is to see graduate shows as much as possible, because they're fresh and the ideas are fresh and they're not being caught by the commercialism of it yet. So it's quite interesting.
Very interesting.
And the V&A, of course. If you want an inspiration, land there.
Yes.
And get, you could just be lost there for a long time.
Yeah.
That's why it's been 22 years.
So, Angus, what can we talk to you about?
Shall I show a couple of things on the
Yes.
screen, actually? Thank you. Actually, I'll actually show you loads of things, really. I was really pleased that Susanna's here, aren't you? Had a go at wriggle work after looking at some of the pewter in the V&A. And so one of the things I really like about the softness of pewter is that you can leave your own mark on it. And this is a an example. I thought it's quite topical because it's got a portrait of William and Mary on it in the coronation the other week. But these were produced as plain tankards by pewterers, and then most likely went out into the marketplace where a jobbing engraver would put the engraving on for you. There are enough differences for when you see the same or a similar pattern. There are enough differences from one to the other to make each one a bit, quite unique and suggest that it was being done freehand. But they were working to sort of often establish patterns. But this is using as a tool and just zigzagging it along the surface and to create that engraving. And Susanna's vase that she produced for this year picks up on that. But I like the idea of pewter being so soft you can leave your personal mark on it as well. And so this is not part of the decoration, but just gives you an idea. This is casting a handle directly onto the body of a flagon, and if you're not using solders or anything like that and you're casting directly on, you can risk burning a hole through the body of the flagon. So the pewterer will get a piece of wet linen, cold wet linen, and press it on the surface to cool the surface. And what it does is it leaves an impression of the pewterer's thumbprint on the inside of the thing. So that's the pewterer's thumbprint through linen from the 1750s. So there is. I would just throw that out there. To use stuff like that is you can leave your own personal mark, your own little biography on the own object, on your own objects that you create.
Can you explain wriggle work to people who?
It's just like a burin, so sort of a sharp tool that you work across and you zigzag, and so it's just done freehand.
All freehand.
Yeah, but it's an incision as you're engraving. So it has this sort of slightly folky look, but it wasn't necessarily cheap. The pewter was in all households. Even the aristocracy would eat from pewter every day and bring out the silver for special occasions, and even much poorer households would have a few pieces of pewter. So it does cover a bigger cross section of society than most other metals. And so you can often look at this and think it looks a bit folky, and therefore it was for a cheap market. It wasn't. This is a similar aesthetic. Second half of the 17th century, you get these beautiful needlework coverings and bed hangings and things like that are produced in ceramics. Slipware ceramics are done in sort of similar patterns. So it's something that the wriggle work is. You see it occasionally on silver, but much more often on pewter. It's something that's quite characteristic of pewter, but it's also part of a wider art historical zeitgeist of designs applied to other materials.
Rebecca, there's two of you working at your bench. What is the future for Struthers? What do you have apprentices so that come?
We've tried training apprentices in the past, but it didn't work out. I think it's very challenging when you're such a small company teaching someone, because if you're not working, then no one is. As we learnt the hard way, and clients will only wait for things so long. So it's tricky, but so the future for us is we're going to stay small. We have a 10-year plan.
Could be AI.
Could replace ourselves. So just clone myself, and then I can retire. That'd be another one. But we've got kind of a 10-year plan where we're going to sell out our build, so from everything from our own house movement to the tailor-made ones I mentioned with the restored movements, and then at 10 years hopefully we'll have generated enough cash for ourselves that we'll be able to then start making whatever we want to make and sell it when it's done. So it's quite nice to have the liberty to be able to do that. So it is tricky when you're trying to run a business. You want to be creative and you have all these ideas, but at the same time you've got to pay the bills. So you're kind of working between the two, and you end up with this huge bank of ideas of things that you really want to do, but no time to do them in. So that's my plan for the future, and then I can have a lot.
Sort of cheap end watch or something to keep you going.
I just couldn't get excited about that. No, I do think about it. I'm a massive Casio fan. I'm not a watch snob at all. That's my usual go-to watch. But I love.
Swatch did very well out of it, haven't they? Really. But,
yes, I've done. I've got a few of them as well. But I think for me, I love getting my hands dirty in the workshop, and that's my thing. And as soon as you start to try and make entry-level stuff, you end up getting further and further away from the object you're making.
And it's a mass production then.
Yeah, it's a completely different game then.
It's a flippant remark, really.
No, it's a good one though, because there are a lot of people who go down that route and think, oh, I could make more if I did all this, and you're right, you just get further and further removed. It's a different market. You've got to sell a lot more to make the same amount of money, and then you're spending a lot of money on marketing as well, which when you're a small independent maker.
So people were buying it thinking, oh, I'm buying a Struthers watch, although it wasn't obviously the quality that you do normally, so it might pay the bills.
I'm not Rolex. Yeah,
I think it's an interesting
different
because
beast.
we do talk to a lot of our artists and makers about creating work on a bandwidth of price points. But what is that bandwidth where you don't want everyone to own your piece?
No, of course not.
You want, so it's a, and that can only that individual can answer that question of what they want that to be, and how what you would call cheap end version should look like, and what the unique versions are, and that really comes down to each individual in where that price point sits for them.
Any questions? Oh, we got to pack up, have we? Oh, apparently we've got to come to...
behind you.
What?
I just wanted to ask.
Oh, sorry.
Ask Rebecca about when you spend all that time making those amazing watches, and then you close it all up, and it gets tucked inside the case with face. Does that feel? I love miniature. The miniature worlds that you create, this beautiful engineering with the gems in there, and then it's secretly tucked away. But I suppose you know what's in there, don't you? You know what's involved.
You do, and using crystal backs is a big thing now, so people can see into the watches. But I think for us, the big moment is when things go out, because you've spent years of your life with this object, making it, and you've seen it go from just chunks of metal in a drawer to an actual functioning thing. And like on the 6-year build, we are visibly older, more knackered by the end of it than we were at the beginning. So this is like a whole part of your life, and an object that's almost symbolic of that is going out into the world, and it's almost like a miniature version of a kid leaving home. It's like, you hope, are they going to behave? Is the world going to look after them? What's going to happen out there? So it's, that's quite a sentimental.
Can I ask you what made you go down the route of creating this labor-intensive work and taking that time to create something that unique?
A little bit of madness.
Always the good stuff.
Yeah, I think for us it started out, when we first started our workshop, we had, we didn't have any capital behind us, so we got a £15,000 bank loan, which is all we could get unsecured at the time. And at the time, kind of like a modern Swiss lathe, which is your foundation point for any watchmaking workshop, cost, with all the accessories, about £30,000. So we ended up having to get all of our tools off online auction sites, getting them from garage floors, people's sheds, usually as boxes of bits, and then restoring these tools, these usually very old tools as well, and dating from sort of the end of the 19th century up to the 1960s and 70s, because that was all we could afford to do. But they're very labour-intensive tools, they're very hands-on, you can't just leave them run. It's a two-way relationship you have with your machines. And as we grew, we actually just fell so in love with these machines that it became part of our creative process. And now, as we grow as a company, we just never change it. So it's kind of accidental, but I'm really glad it worked out that way. All our tools have names as well. They have little name plaques. They're like our workforce. Yeah.
Right, I found that, well, very quickly.
Given your work is super high quality, you expect it to be around in 100 to 300 years. And if it goes wrong in the future, do you think there'll be people around that can repair it? Will you leave instructions on how this thing works?
I hope so. I mean, technically any well-made mechanical watch can be repaired, and as a restorer you see that side of it too. Well-made things can be repaired, they can be taken apart and repaired. It's the less well-made things that can't be. So you can use that to inform your design and creative process now, and consider how will this be repaired in 200 years' time when I'm long gone. And that's, restoration, working with beautiful old objects. That thumbprint I love because, I've found similar things in watches too. So getting hands-on with old stuff can really help you prepare what you're making for a life beyond you. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we have to bring this to an end because prize giving is coming soon. But thank you very much indeed for coming. It's been a great pleasure to thank you very much. And thank you all very much for sitting there. And hope you enjoyed it. you.